Dr. William Shaw, PhD, is board certified in the fields of clinical chemistry and toxicology by the American Board of Clinical Chemistry. Before he founded the Great Plains Laboratory, Dr. Shaw worked for the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Children's Mercy Hospital, University of Missouri at Kansas City School of Medicine, and SmithKline Laboratories. He is the author of Biological Treatments for Autism and PDD, originally published in 1998, and Autism Beyond the Basics, published in 2009. He is also a frequent speaker at conferences worldwide. Dr. Shaw is the stepfather of a child with autism and has helped thousands of patients and medical practitioners to successfully improve the lives of people with autism, ADHD, Alzheimer's, arthritis, bipolar disorder, chronic fatigue, depression, fibromyalgia, immune deficiencies, MS, OCD, Parkinson's disease, seizure disorders, tic disorders, Tourette syndrome, and other serious conditions. That's quite an impressive list because a lot of these conditions, many doctors would say, are untreatable, right?
That's right. So that's our favorite kind.
So was your stepson part of the motivation for developing this lab business, or tell me
Actually,
more
no.
Okay.
No, it was the, so to give you a little bit about the history, I had wanted to start the organic acid test from the very beginning of my career. And so, actually began the first preliminary testing working at the Center for Disease Control. And it was kind of like moonlighting. It wasn't an official project. I just worked on it when time was available. And at that time, mass spectrometry was not as widely available. And I thought this kind of testing is going to be extremely difficult without mass spectrometry. So my next thing was learn how to do mass spectrometry. And I did, and learned everything else about the clinical laboratory, rotated through virtually every division of laboratory testing, immunology, genetic disease. And so I felt like I had a very good grasp of, virtually the entire medical profession. And so I was ready to do the organic acid testing because I now knew mass spectrometry and I knew virtually every disease that there is. And right at that time, Children's Mercy, the pediatric hospital in Kansas City, needed a person to set up organic acid. And I said, bingo, here I am. And so it took a long time because there were, just a very few places in the world where this kind of testing was done. And so a competition, So.
Interesting. So
Yeah.
can you tell people watching what mass spectrometry is basically, because you can.
Yeah. So what it is all molecules are made of atoms, and these atoms are attached together in various ways. And when you put these atoms through, these molecules through a mass spectrometer, they break in characteristic fashions. And those characteristic fashions are a spectrum. So the same molecule, if it goes through the mass spectrometer, is going to give you the same pattern. It's like a fingerprint. And so you can recognize the molecule, and you're also able to quantitate it. So the mass spectrometer is very valuable because you get identity and quantity. So those are the two most important things. Another thing that's very important about the mass spectrometer is you can measure a substance even if you don't know what it is, because you can recognize this unique fingerprint and you can still quantitate it. So you can say, this is the same molecule I saw in this and this and this person, and it's so much of it but I don't know what it is. And so one of the most important discoveries I made was the Clostridia bacteria compounds. I had found them and I had gone to the Children's Psychiatric Hospital in Kansas City, and I said, I think I can unravel a lot of your mystery, psychiatric disorders. And I said, can you give me get some urine samples from some people who were severely affected? And the psychiatrist in charge said, I've got exactly the person for you. This is a kid. It had the depression, ADD, and ODD. And most people know what ADD, but some people think ODD must just mean they're odd. But it means oppositional defiant disorder. It's
okay.
You say, oh, would you turn left? And he turns right. And, would you stop doing that? And he continues. And, so pretty much they just don't obey anytime.
Okay.
They relish in being oppositional. And so when I tested the kid, he had an unusual compound that, after a period of time, I discovered was a compound from a number of species of Clostridia in the intestinal tract. And shortly thereafter, that kid got much sicker and had to be hospitalized. And when he was hospitalized, this chemical that the unique chemical that eventually became Clostridia was gigantic. And so that was my eureka moment, because this was the highest amount of anything that I had ever seen in any organic acid test. So I knew if it was only slightly elevated when he was slightly ill, but then became gigantic when he was extremely ill, that it must be important in its illness. And I reasoned correctly, and this became one of the most common causes of all mental illness, all psychiatric illness. People with this ADD, autism, depression, schizophrenia. But it's still not out there. If it eventually got out to the mainstream, I think I'd have a chance at a Nobel Prize if it got out to the mainstream, because it affects virtually all the psychiatric disease, as well as almost all the gastrointestinal diseases as well. And so this was a major discovery. And later on, I made the other discovery, which is how it causes the illness. So I have the whole mechanism mapped out. This biochemical is produced by about 6 different Clostridia species in the intestinal tract. These chemicals are absorbed from the GI tract and go to the brain, and they inhibit a key enzyme in the brain called dopamine beta hydroxylase that converts dopamine to norepinephrine. And so this enzyme is impaired, and so people who have this develop very high amounts of dopamine. And one of the most extreme symptoms of extremely high amounts of dopamine is psychosis. So we've had, one of the first cases, a psychiatrist had attended one of my seminars. She went home and her adult daughter began having auditory hallucinations, in other words, hearing voices. And, any other person, they would have put them on Risperdal or haloperidol or one of the neuroleptic drugs. But I said, she knew from that you don't need to do that. Put the child on an antibiotic, a specific antibiotic that kills Clostridia, and all her voices were cleared up without using any psychiatric drug at all. And without this information, her daughter might be, still sick 15 years later. She'd be still, and of course, all these drugs have terrible side effects. They make you have abnormal neurologic side effects, as well as many times they cause type 2 diabetes as well. Person gets extremely obese. So instead of all those years of suffering, she probably had, maybe a week or two of Clostridia killing bacteria.
So interesting. Yeah, I think it's great you've done so much work in the psychiatric field. It's one of the most frustrating, I'm sure, for parents and individuals to be dealing. I just wrote an article about kind of kids and back to school, and gut health is so important for kids, and I think they're just not getting a great start in life anymore with food quality and all the different, pesticides and all that. So we're seeing kids with some pretty severe disorders early in life, which is unfair to them, for one thing. They're not really getting a chance in life. So yeah, that gut health is so important. One interesting thing about your test is sort of a little hodgepodge of lots of things it's picking up. So
that's right. Right.
Yeah.
It is. And so that was my goal. When I first started the test at Children's Mercy, the Children's Mercy wanted to set it up primarily for genetic disease, but I subverted their goal, and I wanted to test every possible thing, whether it was due to genetic disease or not. And so one of the observations, so I learned a tremendous amount about disease, and particularly pediatric disease at Children's Mercy after being there 5 or 6 years. So the organic acid test served all the departments: the nephrology, psychiatry, neurology, GI, the whole works. So I got to know, what are the most common tests that the different medical specialties were using, and what kind of metabolic changes happened in the children with various diseases. And I did a lot more than what was anticipated. So my goal was not just to crank out the numbers for the different departments. I wanted to find out what was making the child sick. And so I would completely review the child's medical record when we did the organic acid test. And this is great. And so when I reviewed the record, I would see a recurring pattern. So many of the children at the hospital would, they would have their first visit when they were a couple weeks old, and because they had outpatient, in addition to hospital visits, they also had outpatient and well child clinic and things like that. So many of the children I would see, normal when they were doing their monthly or bi-monthly visits. And then I would see otitis media, amoxicillin being prescribed. And then I would see ADD, or I might see healthy amoxicillin autism, or I might see healthy, a different antibiotic and seizure disorder. And so I began to think, maybe this isn't just a random occurrence, that there might be something to this. And that is where finally, that's where the first page of the organic acid test comes from. What I noticed is that there were these characteristic group of compounds that commonly occurred commonly after the children were on antibiotics. And so a large number of these compounds that you're looking at right here on the page were the ones that I discovered at Children's Mercy, and actually got a patent on the discovery. So all of these were very significant, and I kept learning from those. So So for example, once we developed the mycotoxin testing for mold, what I found out that a number of these compounds, I knew that they were from, as it says, I don't know if the people can they see my pointer?
Yeah, they might not be able to see your pointer, but they might be able to see my pointer.
Yeah. So if you would just point to that it says yeast and fungal markers.
Yeah.
So, but I didn't know, I wasn't sure which yeast and fungus, but once we started doing the mycotoxin test, I found that 2, 4, 5, and 6 were all associated with Aspergillus mold, and that people who had elevated values of this frequently would have mycotoxins that are characteristic of Aspergillus. And then I also found number 9, the tricarboxylic acid, was characteristic of the mold. It's a mold genus called Fusarium. And then some of the compounds like arabinose were associated with Candida. And some of the most important markers were the Clostridia markers, because there was almost anytime somebody had a severely elevated value, there was almost always a fairly severe illness associated with those markers.
Yeah, and I don't see it real as high or as often, I think, because most of our folks coming in are mold folks, so we see more.
You're going to see the ones near the top.
Yeah, what's interesting to me, Dr. Shaw, is like, because we'll get their mycotoxin and we'll see it elevated, but I actually rarely see these orange ones elevated.
Oh, yeah. Well, these are commonly elevated when the person is colonized with the mold. So for example, we had a woman who had lived in the Dominican Republic in a very moldy house or apartment, I don't remember which, was one of the two. And then she left, and 10 years later, we looked at the organic acid, and she had all of these markers characteristic of Aspergillus. And so what had happened, even though she left her moldy house, the mold left with her in her GI tract.
Yeah.
And so if these things aren't treated, they're going to stay around forever. Mold, just if it finds a nice environment, it's just going to set up housekeeping. And, in some cases, I guess it could be there for nearly the person's entire lifetime.
Yeah, at first when I started mold testing, or I don't know, like midway learning through mold, I couldn't kind of believe that you could still have mold in you from so long ago, or sometimes people don't even know where it came from.
Yeah. So it could be that it was from, an event or a contamination or a moldy car, a moldy office, a moldy school, many years ago. And it just set up housekeeping. And the same thing can happen with the Clostridia compounds. Organisms, once they set up housekeeping, they may be there for years and years.
Which is, why this test is really useful. So just to kind of give reference, this is page 1 of the organic acids test. You can run it by yourself with us, so to speak, or you can pair it with a mold test or the GPL tox we'll talk about in a minute. I'm going to kind of skip over the graphics pages. This I usually see when there's yeast and mold.
Yeah, and so that was another important discovery. Initially, what I had thought is that I had seen virtually every child with autism that this was elevated. And as a matter of fact, I didn't want to focus on, because I thought there were many physicians who would doubt the validity of the test. Why is almost every child with autism have elevated oxalates? And I thought, because at that time I only knew, I knew about a little bit about the diet, and I also knew there were genetic diseases that made high. But I thought, I mean, this is so common. Could every kid with autism have a genetic disease? But now, in retrospect, the most likely thing is they have lots of mold. So mold stuff is prevalent in the kids with autism. In last year, a paper was published that every child with autism was infected with a particular strain of Aspergillus.
Oh, wow. How interesting.
Aspergillus fumigatus. And we are on the verge of starting the testing for that. And also the one of the early treatments for the mold was highly successful. This was so Dr. Sidney Baker and I have submitted a manuscript. We haven't got word whether it's accepted or not, but the case study was a 2-year-old with autism, almost no speech, could say maybe yes or no, something like that, and you know, not displaying much affection, and it got older. The speech wasn't getting any better, and he was pretty impaired, and the testing showed he had a high amounts of this Aspergillus metabolite. Dr. Baker put him on a very high dose of antifungal called Sporanox, and in just 3 months he was completely recovered. So I think it's the fastest recovery from autism that has been documented. I don't think anybody else has got a faster. So it went from significant autism to having no autism to developing language skills very quickly, becoming really one of the smartest kids in the class, from not being able to function at all academically to being one of the smartest kids, becoming the star of the soccer team, becoming a pretty good musician. So so he became not only recovered, he became exceptional.
Became better than the most of us. Yeah, that's amazing. And it's what everyone wants. And I think, unfortunately, like, I don't know, people feel like they're going to have to grasp at straws. There isn't much to go on. There's so much.
And that's one of and that was one of the motivations for starting the laboratory. So this resource would become more widely available, because I was doing it as a, just mainly for the hospital population of Children's Mercy, but then word got out, and actually it was, again, at the beginning, that was also from a chance meeting with Dr. Sidney Baker at one of the first autism meetings, and he became interested, and so we started providing the testing to him, and then he told colleagues, and pretty soon it was becoming very popular. And
that's great.
And then at some point, I decided to Children's Mercy did not want to, had different goals than me. I wanted to make it widely available. They were mainly interested in serving their patient population. So we parted ways, and I started the Great Plains Laboratory.
Which is a huge venture. And I really kind of just want to pause and thank you. These are long projects. This is not easy stuff.
Right. This was a lifetime. This really was a virtually a lifetime project from the time I was in my 20s. And so, for example, at CDC, they were measuring the chemicals produced by Clostridia in tissue culture, and in the what do you call it? The Petri dishes. So they would inoculate, the bacteria would grow, and then they would collect it and run it on the mass spectrometer. And I said, why can't you just avoid that and test the blood or urine directly? And they said, oh no, the mass spec isn't sensitive enough. And I thought, I'm going to show them wrong. I can remember thinking right then, I'm going to do that. The thing
That's
that you
great.
said is impossible. And so, but it wasn't like I went out the next day. There were, decades it took. So,
Wow.
this required a tremendous amount of persistence and storing away this information. Clostridia has unique compounds that you can see if you take the culture and then extract it and test it. But maybe I can find the same things in urine. But it ended up, in urine, it wasn't exactly the same as when you took the Petri dish stuff, because the body had altered it and changed it into slightly different compounds. But because of my biochemistry knowledge, I was able to figure out this is coming from Clostridia. And it was extremely exciting. It was probably the most exciting thing in my life, to be honest.
That is amazing. Yeah. And, I definitely couldn't have done what you did, but I really enjoyed the test. And, there's a lot of tests out there now, and people are chasing after this and that. So I just want people to kind of hear, so much has gone into developing this test, and you're a researcher, and, you worked in these hospitals. So I find it's just a very trustworthy test. I'm going to go a little faster now so we can see.
Sure.
But yeah, the mitochondria is helpful when we're looking at mold, which is
and it's also very helpful for toxic chemicals. So probably even more than mold, the Krebs cycle metabolites, and especially succinic acid. So succinic acid is the most sensitive marker for almost all toxic chemicals, for the non-metal toxic chemicals as well as the metals. It's virtually almost always elevated, and if it's really severe toxicity, you'll see sometimes all of the Krebs cycle stuff being
wow.
elevated.
Yeah, I think there's another.
As a matter of fact, I have to just go off on a tangent about the Krebs cycle, because we were giving seminars to groups of parents, and at that time we were a very small group, and we would just, the people had pre-checked, and we checked the name off at the door. And one of the people coming in, I would just happen to walk over at that time, and the person's name was Krebs. So as a joke, I said, that must have been your father who was the one who discovered the Krebs cycle, right? He said, no, it wasn't. It was my grandfather.
Oh, wow. That's pretty awesome.
So I was lecturing that day about the Krebs cycle to one of the Krebs.
So someone was asking for low levels of, let me see if I pronounce this right. I never said it out loud. Actinic acid.
So far, we haven't seen that low. We haven't found. That doesn't mean there's not a disease association. We haven't found one yet.
Okay, yeah, a lot of these levels actually being high is the sign more
right.
than low.
Many of these. So, as a matter of fact, the majority of these high is more important than low. But there are a few changes, like a few exceptions, like in the neurotransmitters. Low neurotransmitters are associated with severe depression.
Wow, okay. I'm going to skip those a bit. Vitamins can be interesting, can be affected by toxins and stress. I see those a lot. Glutathione here, glutathione again. So that's always interesting for me to see. This number 59 is one that you guys focus on a lot, right? This toxin exposure.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to explain that one a bit?
Yeah. Can you bring that page up?
Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot I stopped screen sharing. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Here we go.
Yeah. So, so the pyroglutamic is the best glutathione. The other previous one is not nearly as useful.
Oh, interesting.
The acetylcysteine. The pyroglutamic is an inverse marker, and it says there, just under the section. that, which means that a high value indicates deficiency. So this particular patient would be okay. They're in the orange zone. Anything there is okay. The next metabolite, number 59, is elevated under two conditions, either toxic exposure or defects in the methylation pathway. That means like MTHFR, methionine synthetase. There's about a dozen of the enzymes in the sulfuration methylation pathway. And so high values, again, are very significant. And,
Yeah.
and so one of the things you can do is, if it's high and you're not sure, hey, is this due to toxic exposure or methylation, take a look back at the Krebs cycle. And if the Krebs cycle stuff is elevated, then maybe it's elevated because of toxic exposure. If the Krebs cycle stuff are pretty normal, then you would be more likely to think this is methylation. You could actually then, you could titrate the patient up, until the 2-hydroxybutyric comes down. So one of the worst values that I see is in Down syndrome. I've seen several children with Down syndrome where the values are over 100.
Wow.
Where the upper limit of normal is 1.8. And it's because the child with Down syndrome has 3 copies of the CBS gene on chromosome 21. So they produce, so this particular, having 3 copies of this enzyme instead of just 2, greatly diminishes the production of methionine. And so there's severe methionine deficiency, and giving massive amounts of the methylation agents are very effective treatment of Down syndrome. So
when you say titrate up, you mean methyl donors kind of a thing?
And what I'm saying, you could actually use the biochemical marker to know how much you need to continue the supplementation to get the thing under control. You know, you could give like, say, 2,000 micrograms of methylfolate and, you know, a bunch of methylcobalamin and TMG. Those are some of the common methylation agents. And then see, has the value normalized yet? If not, you double it, and then you could repeat the test again after, say, a week or 2. And eventually you'll find the sweet spot where the value becomes normal.
Okay. Let me pull up a couple more tests to look at.
Yeah.
So the mycotoxin, pretty simple looking tests, but I think probably a lot of viewers are curious about that. So let's look at that. It's a lot simpler to look at than the oat. But I will say, no matter which test you run, you're going to be, happy to have a consultation because, like these ranges can be hard to read, so to speak, if you've never looked at one before, even though it looks simple.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, why don't you put your pointer on the green area?
Okay, right here,
yeah. So a value falls in there. It means you're in the normal range. So for example, gliotoxin is normal is less than 200, and you see the patient's value is less than 200. So they're right in the normal range. But if you look at the one just above, ochratoxin A, the value is 13, so which is nearly double the upper limit of normal. And so the black bar gives you an indication of how abnormal. So this is somewhat abnormal, but of course, for a completely healthy person, you'd want everything in the green zone. So this person has some exposure to mold, is what this means. And another thing to remember, some people think, well, it's only double the upper limit of normal, 7.5, and this is 13. But you have to remember that the median normal value is like 0.2.
Oh.
So this is really 65 times the median value. So so it's really fairly abnormal, and we have good normal. So we took all our lab people and did it, plus a lot of their family members, and we asked that they not do it if they have any mold in the house, and so that is where the the normal values came from. And a lot of people were confused because I heard, well, mold can also come from food, which is true, but all our normal people were eating just a regular diet. So what it means is you don't have to be concerned about eating this or eating that or stopping this for 3 days before the test, because our normal range really compensates for.
Oh, wow. I did not know that. So that's super helpful.
Yeah.
Okay. So even if you're eating cheese and bread and wine, you could still be normal.
Right.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Because I get that question a lot. And one thing I would say, if I saw this number in the red, I would say this is definitely enough to be symptomatic and something you need to clear, although it is maybe a past exposure or exposure you've left.
That's right. It could be they're parked in the GI tract.
Yeah.
But you would at least, if you got this, you definitely want to be checking your house out. And can you go back to the first page just for 1 second?
Yeah. That has more. And
just above it is aflatoxin. That's the one that's commonly found in peanuts, because peanuts grow underground. So they get a lot more mold growing in them because of the fact that they're growing in the soil. And both aflatoxin and ochratoxin are carcinogenic, mutagenic, because they bind to the ATCG of the DNA. And so there's a strong correlation between the amount of aflatoxin exposure, the incidence of liver cancer.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
So they're important for just things like, irritable things like being fatigued or sinus infections or, or just stuffy nose, things like that. But they're also associated with much more serious illnesses. And for example, we recently saw there was a marked relationship with Parkinson's disease, that people with Parkinson's disease have statistically significant higher numbers of these. And we've already checked it out. We see reversal of Parkinson's symptoms with doing this. And I keep on telling people, if you run into J. Michael Fox someday, to tell him we'll give him a free battery of test. He doesn't have to pay a nickel, because we'd really like to. Because that's the kind of thing you would do, and to get the word out. You have to. There's so much information afloat in the internet age that you have to have something spectacular to get noticed. And so something like that would be spectacular if you know some other celebrity with Parkinson's disease.
Interesting. Yeah, so I'll go back to the ochratoxin example, that sometimes I see this number at like 100 or I don't know.
Yeah, and we had one yesterday, 1,100.
1,100. Yeah, so then, when I see those kind of numbers, or 1,100, I saw once on a woman who had been many years in a house with multiple floods and a bunch of stuff in her basement, just all over, high. And the sad part is, the rough part is that often with those people, their brains are so affected and they're so tired that getting out of their situation,
it's more than they can handle.
It's more than they can handle, and they sort of make excuses. I'm not judging, because I was the same way. I unfortunately.
No, it's true. They become so impaired.
Yeah.
They can't. They don't have enough mental capacity to to dig themselves out of the hole.
Exactly. Yeah. So those can often be the toughest cases, whereas, more moderate amounts, or I already moved out of that apartment. Great, because you still need to work on this, because this can also lead to more long-term diseases, and
Yeah.
probably giving you symptoms right now. But I've been to one of your trainings. It was great, and just using sauna alone is one very effective remedy. So it can come down for sure.
It can come down, but you have to either get out of the environment or remediate the environment, because even all these things will decrease it, but then you'll just get re-toxified again.
Yeah, exactly. That's like imperative. And occasionally you move to another moldy place. It happens more often than.
So if you just leave it on the moldy room for just a second.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, I have my the Bible story. Go back to the moldy room.
Oh, the picture?
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Go to your site again.
Yeah, it's on the headline on the GPL. And okay. Yeah.
Gotta go back to the beginning for a sec. Okay, headline of the GPL here, or the mycotoxin.
Yeah, just scroll across, click on the right. One more, because I know it's there. Just click on the right side of the picture.
This one?
The picture of the big fumes and everything. Yeah, just click on the right, and there's like a little arrow that'll come up, and now it's not coming up. But
is it under the mycotoxin though? That picture?
So if
this
you
one.
no, there it is. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
So this is actually I think it's the 2nd chapter of the Bible, Leviticus. There's a very long passage about what to do if your house has the plague in it. And from the description, what they're talking about is mold. So they're saying, if thou shalt see the plague in the house with black and yellow and green color streaking the walls, you need to call the rabbi immediately, and he'll wall up your house, and you have to leave for 7 days. And if he comes back and it's still like this, or it's gotten worse, you'll have to remove all the stones from your house and throw it into the garbage dump.
Wow. So yeah, I've heard about some of that, and because it's like a mud wall.
Yeah.
So, we talk a lot about modern materials causing a mold, but it also is just humidity and
That's right. It's probably been with mankind Leviticus was 1500 BC. So this was 3,500 years ago. People had mold problems. So now we can go, I told my little Bible story. Now we can go.
Yeah, let's just quickly look at this one, and then we'll get questions and wrap up. This is the GBL text. It's quite long. Just an overview is it's not heavy metals test, it's chemicals test. So chemicals.
Yeah, it's so non-metals. Yep.
Yeah, so from jet fuel, gasoline additives, plasticizers, pesticides, just a lot is covered here.
Yeah, so so we tried to get so this is a good example, very high. So focus on this particular one. So the patient, so what we're looking at, most of these are not the original chemical, they're the breakdown product or metabolite of the chemical. In this case, this is the metabolite of benzene. You see under the blue bar, it has a thing that says parent is benzene, and the compound in blue is the breakdown product. The NAP is the breakdown product of benzene, and then the patient's value is in the gray middle section is 34, and then the black bar indicates how severe it is. And as a rule of thumb, once it hits the 95th percentile or more, it's going to be very relevant to the person's illness. I mean, almost always. That's been my experience. And if put your cursor where for that thing where it says 95th.
Right, in here.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
see just below that it says 3. So that
Right.
means any value over 3 is greater than the 95th percentile. And then if you look back at the patient, their value is 34. So it is 11 times higher than the 95th percentile, which is already very abnormal, you know. So this patient has a really significant problem with benzene.
Yeah.
The other thing that you can get from just the name of the word of the metabolite is cysteine. So anyone that has the name cysteine, you can get rid of it by giving the patient glutathione, because glutathione reacts with those cysteine groups, and the glutathione will clomp onto that benzene metabolite and accelerate its excretion. And it's another good way to get rid of it is sauna.
Yeah, yeah, and I think this is the report where you give some tips. I think this is the one on the bottom. Yeah, you have some tips.
Yeah, so we have like a little mini interpretation, and then at the end we have a more extensive information, like how can you get rid of it?
Right.
What
Where
are
does it come from?
Where does it come from? Yeah, because it's just like the mold, you need to get out of it. So if you're being continually exposed to this toxic chemical, like one person said, how can I be getting this? You know, I live in London in an apartment. Well, it ended up the apartment was above a motorcycle repair shop, and she was wondering where she got the chemicals from gasoline fumes.
Right.
It was, you know, she was living on the second floor and the motorcycle shop was just underneath her.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, and I even see it high on people who don't know where they got it. They just think it's in the outdoor air now.
And it could be, especially if the person has to go in a track, you know, if like the LA freeway or something where you have a big traffic jam, you're going to get a lot more exposure.
Yeah, and I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but when you see, you know, some of these levels high, plus there's mold, plus there's infections, plus there's some other things, I feel like your ability to clear things could be just hampered, and that could
be yeah. And so the sauna can be very useful in those cases, because it will, you know, it will help to get rid of mold as well as many of these toxic chemicals. As a matter of fact, people who do a lot of prescribe a lot of sauna say they'll see some people with after a few sauna treatments, they'll just see the chemicals pouring out. They'll see it all over the person's skin, you know. And I've even got I've got some of the photos where, you know, black, red, green stuff coming out of the skin. One woman, one 40-year-old woman reported that after a few sauna treatments, she was smelling a perfume she had used as a little girl. It was, you know, a very distinct smell, and it was coming out, you know, 35 years later. It had been stored in her body for 35 years and was now being released.
Yeah, so this is a marker you guys emphasize a lot, and then I'll come off because it's not really a toxin, it's a marker of mitochondrial damage from toxins.
That's right. So we have one marker on the toxic chemical profile, and then succinic acid is the also probably an equivalent liver or mitochondrial toxicity marker on the organic acid test. And of course, you will see some people will have both, some people will only have one or the other.
Okay, and this is quite a bad score. Again, I would be very concerned for this person doing a lot of mitochondrial.
That's right, and a lot of detoxification as well. So you know, because the mitochondria is the most susceptible organelle in the body. So.
Good. Great. Well, I'm going to come off this because I know some questions came in, and then I'll share a little bit more about our service. Marie asked, would an ochratoxin level of 33 be dangerous? I think we probably answered that.
Yeah, so a value of 33
Okay.
would be more than 100 times the median normal range that we saw in our employee study of close to 100 people.
Okay. Okay. And then
So
Lynn
I would judge that as harmful. You might ask her, what are some of your symptoms?
Right. And looking at the house, like you said, the environment's really important. Occasionally I see people who have high levels and they're like, I feel mostly good except, some fatigue. They don't have a ton of symptoms, but.
And the fatigue is probably it's one of the most common mold symptoms. A study done by Dr. Brewer in Kansas City found that it was like 99% of patients with chronic fatigue had elevated mold metabolites.
People have become so used to being fatigued and
they think it's normal because they've
right.
been fatigued so long.
Yeah. So Lynn had some specific questions. She must have run a test. She asked about high homovalinate and high hyperate. I can't never say these.
And the first one was homovanillic.
Homovalinate, she said? Or is it supposed to be homovanillic? Here, I'll put it in the other chat so you can see it. Do you see that in the chat?
Let's see. Yes, yeah.
Okay.
So homovanillic acid is the acid form of the molecule, and homovanillate would be the salt form of the molecule. So it's the same molecule,
gotcha.
But two slightly different names, but they're the same thing. And high amounts of that, the two most common things are the Clostridia colonization of the intestinal tract. That's one. And the second is a genetic disorder. And people, when they hear that, they think, oh, those are rare things. But the one that causes the high homophenolate is which is called dopamine beta hydroxylase deficiency, is one of the most common genetic disorders. About 1 out of every 25 people have it. So, which 4% of the population, and of course, it's much more common in people who have an illness. So if you have some illness, the first thing you would do is see, on the organic acid test, do you have Clostridia high? If you don't, it means you have one of the genetic abnormalities or SNPs so that your body has excess amount of homovanillate, and so it causes many things, but one of the most common things is low blood pressure, especially when standing up. And so people who have this, a number of people have died because they'll just be walking down the street, their blood pressure will fall, they'll faint and crack their head open on the sidewalk because the blood pressure is so low. The great thing about it is that there's a new drug that came out about 10 years ago that can reverse all that and make your homovanillate go down, make your blood pressure come up, and it works pretty well. The only bad thing, of course, since it's the only company that has it, it's expensive. That's the only, and unfortunately, there's no supplement fix. It's just one, you're at the mercy of one particular company. But you can, if you want to, the Great Plains also has that, but you need a blood test, and it's just called the DBH test, which is on blood serum.
Okay. Okay. So I'm gonna share. Did we get her all covered? Vanillite and high hippurate. I don't know how to say it.
Yeah, with the high hippurate, it is sometimes associated with Clostridia. So of course, that's the first thing. Do you have Clostridia? Because if you have,
Okay.
so the Clostridia causes all the same effects as the genetic deficiency. And of course, there's some people that have both. They have the genetic deficiency and the Clostridia. And so those are some of the people who are most severely affected.
Okay. Sorry.
Because of having both factors.
Okay. Okay, so to wrap up, this is how we structure the molds and toxins testing. It's all with Great Plains. You can just do mold, you can do mold and organic acids, you can do all of it, so to speak, or if you just want to do organic acids for some reason, we really let you kind of pick around, and any one you pick is $50 off through Monday, which is the Labor Day, and I think it's the 7th. So yeah, that's that. And it always includes a review with us, a plan with us. Why we do a lot of lab reviews from other companies and other clients is because unless you have skilled help in interpreting all this, you're going to have an expensive lab test that didn't really do anything for you. So the follow up, follow through is super important. And both Mickey and myself can read these tests for you. We both have a lot of personal experience with mold as well. So they're very interesting tests to get and see, what exactly is causing your symptoms or your child's symptoms. So we'd love to meet you on the session. It would be fantastic. Any last comments, Dr. Shaw?
No, just thank you for this opportunity. I enjoyed it. It was a pleasure meeting you, Bridgit.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah, I definitely want to keep in touch. Really, again, thankful for the work you've done. I know, we still need Michael J. Fox, but we're, little by little, we're spreading the word, and more people are taking these tests, which is fantastic.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks everyone for being on as well.
Good afternoon.
Bye, everybody. See you next week.